The laughter came first, sharp and careless, slicing through the quiet hall like it owned the air. And it belonged to Victor Hale, a man whose smile had been photographed more times than some countries' flags. A self-made millionaire who believed money was the purest language on earth, and as he leaned back in his leather chair beneath the chandelier of the Global Mind Summit, he raised a thin white card between his fingers and said loudly, "I'll give you $1 million if you translate this." Not because he expected an answer, but because he expected silence. Because the card held 5 sentences, written in 5 different scripts: Arabic, flowing like sand dunes; Mandarin, stacked like stone towers; Cyrillic, sharp and cold; Latin, elegant and familiar; and a final line in a dying tribal script most people in the room had never even seen, and the audience laughed with him, not cruelly at first, but comfortably, the way people laugh when they believe they are on the right side of power. And at the edge of the stage stood a boy no older than 12, thin shoulders under an oversized jacket, hands folded not in fear, but in patience. His name announced earlier and forgotten just as quickly. Because nobody came to see a child. They came to see Victor Hale confirm what they already believed about the world, that brilliance belonged to those who could afford it. And the boy waited as the laughter rippled, waited as Victor waved the card like a magician taunting an empty hat, waited because he had learned long ago that noise passes, but truth stays. And when Victor finally leaned forward, smirk widening, and said, "Go on, kid. This is your moment," the boy lifted his head, and for the first time the room noticed his eyes, not wide with wonder, not narrowed with anger, but steady, as if he had already seen this scene play out in another language somewhere else in his life. He began softly, not rushing, translating the Arabic first, not word for word, but meaning for meaning, about patience outlasting storms, and the room quieted a little, enough for a few people to stop smiling. Then he moved to Mandarin, voice still calm, translating a proverb about mountains bowing to time, and Victor's laughter faded into a thin grin. Then Cyrillic, a line from an old wartime letter about hunger teaching truth; then Latin, a legal phrase about justice without wealth being an illusion. And now the room was silent, no coughs, no whispers, only the boy's voice anchoring everyone in place. And finally he paused, not for drama, but because the last line mattered most, the forgotten script, the one Victor had added as a joke after buying an antique notebook at an auction. And the boy said, "This last one," and his voice shifted heavier now, "is from a mountain tribe whose language no longer has schools, only grandmothers," and something in that sentence cracked the room. And it says, "When the rich laugh, listen closely, because they are afraid someone understands more than money." And the silence that followed was not polite, it was stunned, as if the building itself had inhaled and forgotten how to exhale. Victor stood up slowly, the smirk gone, applause scattered and hesitant, before swelling into something real. But the boy did not smile, because this had never been about proving himself. It had been about surviving a world that tried to erase him. The host stammered, cameras zoomed in, social feeds exploded, and Victor, visibly unsettled, said, "Where did you learn all that?" Expecting a clever answer, something inspirational and safe, but the boy said simply, "At home." And when Victor laughed again, this time uncertain, and asked, "What kind of home teaches 5 languages?" The boy answered, "The kind that loses everything and keeps only words." And that sentence landed harder than any translation, because it carried hunger inside it. And as Victor gestured for water, suddenly aware that the audience was no longer on his side, but leaning toward the child, the boy continued uninvited, "Because once you've been silent your whole life, truth feels like breathing." And he spoke of a mother who cleaned houses and corrected his grammar in 3 tongues while scrubbing floors, of a father who disappeared at borders, but left behind notebooks filled with alphabets and notes, saying knowledge crosses fences faster than people, of nights without electricity where language became light, and of teachers who laughed the way Victor had laughed when he asked questions they couldn't answer. Somewhere in the back someone began crying quietly, and Victor's jaw tightened as he realized this was no longer entertainment. It was exposure, and when he finally said, "The offer stands," the room held its breath, expecting triumph, but the boy shook his head. Not arrogant, not proud, just certain, and said, "You said if I translate it," and Victor nodded. "I did," and the boy replied, "I already have," and turned slightly toward the audience, not the millionaire, and added, "But if you give me $1 million, give it to schools that teach children how to understand the world. Not just buy it," and the applause this time was thunderous, uncontrollable, drowning out Victor's attempt to speak. And in that noise the cameras caught something rare. A rich man realizing money had failed him in public. And as security tried to guide the boy off stage, the host whispered, "People are calling this the moment of the year." And the boy paused at the edge, looking straight into the main camera, voice steady despite the storm behind him, and said, "If this story meant something to you, stay with us, because there are millions of voices like mine still unheard." And that simple line did more than any shouty plea ever could, because it felt like an invitation, not a command. And somewhere out there, screens glowed, fingers hovered, and people who had come to laugh found themselves subscribing not to a channel, but to an idea that understanding is the real wealth. And as Victor Hale sat back down, the white card trembling in his hand, he realized the boy hadn't taken his money, but he had taken something far more expensive, the belief that laughter is power. And that was only the beginning. After the applause faded and the cameras shut down, the real transformation began. Victor Hale, no longer laughing, invited the boy into a quiet room where money could not speak for him. There, without an audience, the boy explained that languages were not talents, but bridges built from pain, patience, and hope. Moved for the first time in years, Victor realized the challenge had never been about translation. It was about understanding. The next morning, he announced a global scholarship fund in the boy's name, proving that true wealth is not what you give to impress others, but what you give to change lives. In the days that followed, the video spread across the world, but the boy returned to his quiet life unchanged by fame. Victor Hale, however, could not escape the moment. The laughter that once defined him now echoed